All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we're live now, so it's good. Welcome, everyone, to the last day of the first SwiftUI series. And today we're going to be focused on accessibility. And I think I've been looking forward to today's event maybe the most, not to diminish the other ones. But I had a lot of fun making that inaccessibility project, which was super terrible in terms of accessibility. And then after seeing all the entries come in this week, it was so much fun. I saw so many approaches that I didn't even think of. I was like, oh, I'm going to find every little accessibility nook and cranny that people have to figure out. But the entries really, really surprised me. So I'm really looking forward to this last event. And also because, again, it seems like we have a pattern going on here. We have two great judges for this event, Robin and Buzz. We're all in the same time zone, which is why this live stream is so early in the morning for most of you. I guess a lot of people are still asleep, but you can watch this back later. So good morning for the people who are still asleep. Yeah, so Robin, hey, welcome. Good morning.
Hi, happy to be here.
Glad to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm an iOS and an Android engineer. Have been for a while now, but over the past few years, I've really gotten into mobile accessibility. So I'm not current. My current day job doesn't have an accessible application, but I do a lot on my own time, and I don't know. I'm just happy to be here to be able to geek out with you guys about accessibility on SwiftUI.
So you say you do both Android and iOS. Is there any major things that you see between the platforms in terms of accessibility that like stand out?
Ooh, there's a lot of little things I would say. There's not so much as one big thing that's a difference between the platform. It's just it takes a while to learn the equivalencies on iOS and Android, especially with Jetpack Compose and the old XML and stuff like that. And UIKit and SwiftUI, it makes a lot.
Nice. Yeah, so someone who knows a lot about UIKit and SwiftUI is Buzz, and especially in the accessibility frame, because he worked at a certain fruit company for a while as well on the accessibility team. So I would say that he probably has a bias on um, which of the two platforms are good about accessibility. Hey, Buzz, how are you doing?
Hey, Yardi. Yeah, doing good.
Good to have you here as well. I remember like a few years ago, we were already, when we first met, we were also talking about accessibility every now and then, and it's really cool to see you've gone way down into that whole rabbit hole in the most positive way. So I'm really looking forward to the both of you. Yeah, just to share what our entries have done right and what they can do better in the future still. So yeah, let's just go straight to the code. Today's event was quite simple for the people who don't know it. Well, quite simple in terms of the explanation. Um, there's a little app, a little stock app that I made, which is really bad in terms of accessibility, and it's your job basically to fix it. So let me just open it first so you can actually have a look at what we're talking about, because it's best to show what's so bad about it. The problem with hosting an event like this is that your Xcode recent projects list is just filled with entries from people. So hopefully I can find it somewhere in here. In accessibility 1 and 2, that's always good. Which one should it be? Yeah, so it's this one. So what I basically did is I took a very simple, or I made a very simple stock app. Just some simple lists, some information about the stocks, these fictitious stocks, um, and basically tried my best to make it like to find all these little glitches. Out of the box, SwiftUI does a lot of things for you if you don't like purposely mess it up. So it was actually quite hard for me to make it like not work. Um, but yeah, so just by looking at this screen, Robin and Buzz, what are obvious things that you think could be done wrong?
The first thing that jumps out at me is red and green.
Why is that?
Um, because the color blindness between red and green is very common. So we always want to, for accessibility, to have something other than color that indicates if the stocks are going up or down.
Yeah, so obviously here this doesn't make sense. This one is green, it has a minus in front of it, so I guess I messed up some stuff there as well. So what would your approach be to solve something like that?
Oh, to either have some sort of an icon like an arrow going up, an arrow going down. You can still use the colors red and green. Obviously, correct the minus and the green, make sure it's consistent. But something that when you put your iPhone into grayscale mode, you still understand that like the stocks are going up or the stocks are going down.
Nice. Yeah, so one of the nice things about Xcode is actually that you can have a lot of these accessibility overrides. You can actually toggle them directly from the simulator. I'm trying to see why grayscale now doesn't actually make it grayscale for me. Does either of you have an idea why that's not happening?
Do you know that if you put grayscale in and then actually like share that screen, it will not share it in grayscale? But I'm not sure if that's the case here.
Okay, well, maybe that's an exception because I saw that some of the other ones were working. But and we're going to share from my phone later as well. That's actually a good one. The reason I put the red and green in there as well is that the colors that like we in the West assume that green is positive and red is negative, whereas in other cultures such as China, for example, it's actually the opposite. So those are also things to consider, that these assumptions we have about color are very culture based. And then if you get into color blindness, it becomes even more, right? So I was really happy to see that some of the entries actually built in full color blindness modes. An obvious one that most people are probably aware of is dynamic type, where users can actually change how big. This sometimes happens for some reason. I'm not sure if it's just me, where dynamic type just crashes my simulator. But yeah, so people can change the size of the text across their apps, and I actually saw some research over the years where 30 or 40% of people actually change it to something that's not the default. It's really crazy that Xcode is crashing for me for changing just the dynamic type, but yeah, obviously when people get into bigger sizes, you can see that the whole UI just gets messed up. You can't read any of the labels anymore. Same here, like stuff just starts jumping up and down. So yeah, a lot of stuff that can be improved here just from this 2 minutes of playing around with it. So without further ado, let's have a look at what the contestants came up with. So we had 6 or 7 entries, and the last one actually came in about 30 minutes ago, so we haven't had a chance to look at that one yet, but most of the other ones we've briefly looked at least. And the first one is by Flo. Didn't have any documentation of what he changed, so let's have a look at their code. Trust and open. So if you see, oh, sorry, go ahead, Buzz.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the project that we just saw, right? So one of the things that stands out to me as well is like top left is what seems to be a custom icon or some kind of settings. You're probably gonna want to label that and have like a label that explains what this does, as well as, and that also applies for something like tap for more. If you're going to think about other inputs other than the screen reader, so if you're thinking full keyboard access or voice control, you're going to change those so that you're not going to be saying tap for more, because that would be awkward. As well as with keyboard access, you can search for something, and so someone might say settings and search for settings for the top left image. Or icon, but someone else might say gear or cog, and so you can add those so that you can make it easier for the user to navigate to where they want to go.
Yeah, really good points there as well. One of the reasons why I put the tab for more in there was because Buzz, before we started this, mentioned that hey, that's something that a lot of people get right or get wrong. So yeah, good to see. So I think, is this Flo's project? I don't think so, no. Let me see, where is Flo's project? Is this Flo's project? it seems when I opened Flo's project, it's just the same project, so I'm not really sure if I messed up something there. We'll get back to that one in a second because I want to double check that I'm not overlooking something and messing something up. So let's go to Chris Woos, and Chris wrote a little introduction about what he did. So he has a few apps that he works on, and then a few years ago he noticed that his mom was using one of his apps and on one of the non-default settings, and everything kind of got messed up. So since then he's been getting more into actually fixing his accessibility across his apps. And it's a good point because we were just talking about the color blindness. He actually built a picker so that people can choose different different color settings. So is there a default way to handle this? Are there default colors that you can use for the different types of color blindness, or how should people approach that?
That is a good question. Boss, do you have an idea?
I don't think there's particularly like colors that explain like, hey, these would work with a certain kind of color blindness. But one thing to know is that all the default colors that ship with the OS, so especially now since we have semantic colors, these colors come with colors for light mode, colors for dark mode, and also colors for like increased contrast. And so that gets you quite far. And then apart from that, you might want to look at, having a proper contrast. And then in the settings of iOS, not only can you enable grayscale, but you can also set certain color filters that basically apply what a person with color blindness would see. So you can use those to figure things out. And then there's another thing that is a setting that you might want to look into, which is differentiate without colors. And that is kind of what Robin already mentioned, where, hey, maybe you want to have an arrow that indicates, is this going up or down in terms of the stocks?
Makes a lot of sense. So off the bat, we immediately see that Chris did some changes to the text. So based on the size that was set, you'll see that the text goes up and down. For some reason, my Xcode changes every time I change the dynamic type. So give me 1 second. No, it's just not loading at all anymore. What's going on?
Ooh, live demos.
No, it's going really well all week, so I'm quite surprised. All right, let's try it one more time. Yeah, so you can see that what he actually does is he changes the layout of the views based on the text size, so that it actually becomes readable. I'm not saying it's necessarily looking really pretty, but it gets the job done, and it makes sure that people who have higher font sizes can still see it. So there's a few approaches that people can take there. Let's have a look at what Chris did. I guess it's all in the stock. So yes. So do either of you want to talk a little bit about this approach?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, yeah. So we're taking a look at it at a bigger text size and also at a smaller text size, which is good to note, because there's going to be people that crank up the size but also make it smaller. And so one of the interesting approaches that you can do is say, hey, if we are in a particular size, we want to like change the way that the cell is being laid out. And so that is something that might be going on here. There we see at the bottom we have the H stack, and if we are in an accessibility text size, we have a V stack, and otherwise we pass in just the stock price. So that is kind of what I was talking about, where if you have more text to lay out, you have less. Most often you have less horizontal space, and so if you lay them out vertically, you have some more space to play with.
Yeah, so I think that's a very common thing where you just based on the text size, just change between an H stack and a V stack, and you can already get a lot of the way there. Because by default you just won't have enough space in the 375 pixels or so, but you can scroll infinitely basically. So you need to get a little bit away from having the perfect view then at some point, because you can't really design for all these different use cases to always look perfect, but you can at least make it look usable.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's something good to note, right? Like, yeah, like it becomes big, and you get certain like user experience like challenges, and like it might not be perfect, but having it accessible is like a very good first step. And then another thing that I think this might not have updated the simulator correctly, but if you look at the second stock, there is this line, the like description, and you want to make sure that can wrap around how it properly wraps around. And so not limiting the line limit is something you definitely want to do as well.
Yeah, so one of the things you can actually do there is when you run your app, you can give it a certain language, and you can tell it to use a double-length pseudo language. And what will happen there is that all the strings will basically get replaced with either like twice as long strings or double strings. Not sure why. Oh yeah, so you see some stuff going on here, which will help you figure out, okay, how does it work in German, or how does it work with accents, or all these common things that you tend to overlook if you just look at your own device, right?
Yeah, so, totally. I wasn't going to make the joke that you can also just turn on German, but
I guess Chris did that for us by putting the Rechtsschutzversicherungsgesellschaften, I think, in there. So yeah, Chris also added some extra accessibility modifiers. Robin, are you familiar with the ones he's using here?
Oh yeah, we got the accessibility label. That is cool that he replaced, even though it's a text, so the accessibility label by default will be the text itself. He's replaced it with the short name, also with the description, so that's cool. It's easier to understand. He made it a little creative. It's a text object, but then he added the trait is button.
Yeah, I wonder why he did that, because I think the whole cell is actually clickable as to open the detail view. So I guess he wanted people to also be able to click on that. So I'm gonna try to get VoiceOver to run here on my phone in a second, so we can actually go through it. Because I purposely put some text as like, try to make them buttons by using an on-tap gesture, but obviously you want to just use a button there, because then you get a lot of these accessibility things for free, right?
Yeah, and even he might have added is button because that will add the word button in the description after the label. So it will make it seem more like a button, even though it's a text object. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So one of the tricks... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that's maybe something interesting to know for those watching as well, right? So this is what Robin is saying. It will indeed like add an indication that this element is a button, which technically you could do in your label, but there's a bunch of reasons why you want to prefer the traits. And that is because then the system can infer a lot, right? And say, hey, if this is a button, we'll make it work properly for voice control, for switch control, etc. And one of the most interesting things, I think, there is when you go really deep into accessibility, you might end up like testing Braille. And so you have these Braille displays that basically with tiny dots, you can read through your elements and what's on screen. And so for button, it will actually like concatenate that to BTN, because like reading like that with your fingers, and if you have like a really long text, like that becomes quite tiresome, especially if you have many buttons or many images or many things like that. So it's really interesting how the system is very, very much optimized to like properly take these traits into account.
Yeah, nice. And also I like that he added these accessibility hints, all these little details, so that people know what they're looking at. And one of the tricks I put in there was there's this little star button or this star icon that shows for the favorite icons, for the favorite stocks. And what I did by default is just uh, make the opacity 0 or 1 based on if it was a favorite stock or not. But what would happen in VoiceOver is that it would still it would still say something about that thing even though it's not visible. So Chris actually put a little accessibility hidden modifier here as well, because sometimes there's just elements in your views that you don't want to be spoken out loud or that you don't care about in that user interface basically. So yeah, there's a lot more that we can go into on that screen, but obviously we don't have time to go into each detail. But here in the detail view, you can see that he changed some of the colors as well, and that's because here on the settings page, you actually allowed the possibility to change different colors, which I think is really nice and really allows people to customize it for their needs. Are there certain settings you can use there to automatically change the colors based on someone's color blindness settings or something?
Like I said before, I don't think you can do that. But definitely what I like is that there's settings for accessibility, and I feel that is I would even say like it's an area that is like underexplored of like adding like custom like accessibility settings to your app. But again, you can test with grayscale. You can test with certain color filters that mimic color blindness. And then again, with using the default system colors will also get you quite far.
Yeah, it might actually be nice if out of this whole event we can come up with some sort of, hey, these are accessibility settings that would be nice to have in your apps, because it seems like they're quite easy to implement from what we've seen so far. So maybe something like the color blindness, maybe some extra overrides of system settings, although I would assume that most people just want the system settings for accessibility. But yeah, I think really, really nice job, Chris, with focusing on those little details there as well. And there's a lot more that we can dig into, but we don't have time for that. But yeah, thanks so much. Then we will move on to, if GitHub's loading, Alexei Ivashko, which is, let me see, what's the overcut? It's this one. So what I like about our entries for today is that everyone wrote like almost like a changelog of what they did. So this person even added iPad support, which I did not test at all. Searchable, so they improved like a lot of things just about how the app works. So we're not going to go too deep into that, but it's really cool to see. And yeah, so what they also focused on a lot is these environment objects for like reduced transparency, reduced motion, all these things that you can set in the OS settings, and then you maybe want to avoid that in your app. So if you want to hide animations or something like that. So yeah, I'm gonna try to run this, and then let's have a look what we have here. And maybe the two of you can walk. Yeah, maybe the two of you can walk through it, and I will set up my device for sharing the screen, so we can actually show some voiceover stuff as well.
One thing that already stands out to me on this one is looking into rotors, and with searchability, etc. That's a really interesting thing to aid and to improve specifically voiceover navigation. And so for those that are unfamiliar with rotors, if you look at the app on the right, we have favorite stocks, we have all stocks. And so, it would be really nice if in a voiceover environment, we can navigate directly from favorite stocks to all stocks to whatever other like filtering mechanisms there are. Because if you don't add proper support, you'll have to go, as a user, you have to go through all the stocks, and then in the end, you end up with the stock you want. But with the rotor, we can navigate between these sections, and we can even add custom rotors to like aid that navigation and to skip over certain things.
Yeah, I thought that part was really cool as well, using anything to do with a rotor, and he used custom actions. I think he said in his documentation, that stuff is the next level of accessibility, so I find that really cool.
I'm trying to see if there's any part of the code we can highlight about that. Let's see, Is there any part you would like me to zoom in on?
You could check if there's some mention of the custom action, for example. We can take a look at that. Or I guess it's called accessibility action in SwiftUI.
Yeah, there's definitely the word action in there somewhere.
Swipe actions, accessibility action, yes. So we have it here, the self view, and then accessibility action. And then, okay, this one is completely foreign for me. So basically it gets added to the self view, which are these individual cells for these individual stocks. You had some swipe gestures there as well, which is actually nice. I guess it does the same thing as you would do when you yeah, that was what Chris had an untapped on the name, because if you would tap on the name, it would pop up this alert. So you would add this to a cell to do what exactly again? Sorry, I was not fully.
I actually think the accessibility action here is what gets triggered when you like double tap in VoiceOver or like activate. But then you have the swipe action, which should actually generate a custom action. And a custom action is nothing other than a separate rotor entry where we can swipe through and like do certain actions, right? So if we look at one of these cells, you can like drill into them. You can go to the detail view. That is probably your default activation action. But then another action could be to like star it or to remove it or share it, etc. And so sure, we can like go into it and then like navigate to like sharing, but we can also add them as these custom actions. And here we even have context menu actions. And again, this makes this navigation easier to say like, okay, I want to share this stock, or I want to show the info about it. And so with swipe actions, that again, this should be dealt with by the system.
Makes sense. So I was actually able to set my device up here so we can actually go through some of the voiceover stuff as well. So I don't think you'll be able to hear the audio itself, but it's a simple toggle you can change from accessibility, and you can even make it so that you can toggle this by clicking the home button a bunch of times. But this basically allows you to hear voiceover out loud. So let me. How do you actually do a swipe? Yeah.
What you can do is you can turn on the caption panel, which basically adds a small like thing at the bottom that will write out the voiceover output, so that people can still follow along even if we can't hear it.
Good one. Can you show me where that's actually?
At the very bottom.
Okay, hang on.
This caption panel.
Let's see if you can maybe. This maybe works as well. Caption panel, yes. Can you hear it as well or not?
No, we can't hear it, but then we can follow it along with that.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So immediately, how do I get now in VoiceOver to my previous app?
You could swipe up from the bottom of the screen like any normal user would and use the app switcher.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
I think it's a long swipe. Maybe I'm mistaken. It's been a minute.
Let me see.
It's a little tricky to get used to VoiceOver. Like it's definitely something that you have to get used to.
Oh no! Hang on. Okay, I'm just going to run the app again. That's probably the easiest way. Okay.
Well, like you said, right? You can ask Siri to turn on VoiceOver or to turn it off, or use the use the side button. So that might be easier as well.
Yeah. So I'm in the app now. I'm just going to swipe through some stuff. So I like this part where you can just quickly like toggle it off and just skip to the next part. Because what you were saying before, otherwise people would have to go through all of them one by one.
Well, something to note, right? So favorite stocks is both a button and a heading. And so because it is a heading, which I assume is the same for all stocks, we can also use the rotor and turn the knob to actually navigate between those headings. So sure, we can collapse the view or collapse the stocks, but we can also navigate through it because they are headings.
And so the rotor allows you to just basically skip through certain sections just to go through it more quickly instead of having to go one by one by one. Is that be a simple explanation for what people can
Specifically,
can do more things, of
specific,
course.
yeah, specifically that rotor would be to navigate, by heading. But the rotor, you can navigate to custom content. You can, change your speech. You can do all sorts of things.
Nice. So what I liked is that they actually grouped all the information in a cell in one element here. So when you go through it, I actually turned off the audio for me as well because it was just constantly talking. So you can see all the stuff that gets pronounced whenever you go there. So how do you determine, maybe Robin, how do you determine like what information you let voiceover or similar technologies speak out loud and which you don't?
Oh, well, anything that would help you understand the application if you had a blindfold on. It's usually how I think about it. So there's some things that you can announce but really don't add any value or context, and there's some things you actually really need to announce, like the name of the stock, for example. You can't skip over that. But maybe there's some things about that chart specifically on the cell view that can wait until you're on the detailed view. You can say something brief, more brief, like it's going up, or something, click to see more details. Things like that. It's a judgment call, really.
Nice. Yeah, makes sense. And it also, there's not one thing that you can do there for every app because it really depends on the content that you have then, right?
Right.
Yeah. Let's have a look. What else did they focus on that we can show?
And maybe to add to what Robin is saying there, um, I like the blindfold idea, but also note that there's going to be users of assistive technologies like VoiceOver that can still have some sight, right? So you also don't want to assume that in a VoiceOver mode, like users cannot see anything. But at the same time, yeah, you definitely want to convey all the information that you show to a sighted user also to a VoiceOver user, rather that in this case is like, okay, we'll have to go to the detail view for the graph, but you definitely still want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because you don't want to just assume that they will only want to see those details when they click on it, because that would be very tedious if they would always have to go deeper to see, for example, the graph when they can maybe see it 20% or 30% well.
Yeah, one rule of thumb there is in certain like extreme situations, you can like have in SwiftUI an accessibility representation where you can completely override your view and provide like a custom representation in for assistive technologies. But generally, that's something you want to shy away from because, for example, in this case, if you say, "Oh, we're in voiceover, so we're not going to show the stock graph at all," like that will hurt certain users because they might still be able to see and they still can take a glance at it. So yeah, that is something to keep in mind.
Good points. I think the best approach is probably just to speak to some of your users who have accessibilities and just try to understand how they're using your app and what information they're looking for or maybe missing. Because I think it's very easy to make assumptions based on, you've been using apps and phones for years like this. So just to ask for feedback there, I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely crucial because you're gonna make assumptions and you're gonna miss things. Like it's just how it works, and so your users will definitely be able to like give you insights and share their their feedback.
Yeah, and they're usually some of your most enthusiastic users. But if you're putting effort into making it work well for them or better for them, that they will want to give you feedback and want to give you suggestions. So, yeah. But what I usually do somewhere in my app is like say, hey, if there's some feedback you have about anything, let me know. And sometimes specifically before launching, reaching out about accessibility, and then you oftentimes get really nice responses from people. So that was Alexi's entry. Obviously, a lot that you didn't cover there, but we have to keep going. So then we'll go on to Ryan Cole, who wrote a full essay on all the things that he changed. So that's
Love the documentation here.
it's really nice. Yeah, I think everyone put in so much effort into learning as well, and like documenting what they learned, so that other people can just go through it and see, oh hey, I added this because it solves this. I added this because it solves this. So yeah, I was super happy with that. So let me just first run it on the simulator. And
I think what we also were discussing is that this, this project, this challenge, like basically is set up like a great resource on, if you're interested in accessibility or wanna learn more, like looking at the app, looking at the solutions, and then especially also the documentation. It's like a fantastic way to get an understanding of accessibility and figuring out like where can I start and what can I do. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, so what we can see immediately from the start is that that he took your advice, Robin, about making sure that the labels that it's clear without the colors as well, to see which ones are going up and down. And also the thing you can see here compared to the other one is, or to the base project in terms of colors, is that the contrast is a lot higher. So there's a whole section there.
I wonder if that's because they use like system provided colors with high contrast enabled, but
let's have
might
a
also
look.
be because they've just increased it by default.
Let me see, I think it's this one. It's the problem is they all have the same name, so I have to make sure I open the right one. Let's search for the word contrast. So you're basically just looking for color scheme contrast. Is that a system accessibility setting as well?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also love all the documentation in the code itself. But it doesn't seem like they used a specific extra color, right? Or like a change to the colors there.
I mean, it might be that they just changed the colors to be, more contrast, like increased contrast by default.
Yes. So as you can see here, they actually chose some custom colors that they were using. I guess with green and red, even if their contrast is high, you could still have the issue with color blindness, right?
I would think so, yeah. I'm not too familiar with all types of color blindness, but again, this is something you're going to want to check with the color filters.
Yeah, so something they did is actually to go over all the different colors and check if there's this 4.5:1 contrast ratio. There's these guidelines that you can look up online, where you can actually put in your colors, so the foreground and the background color, to determine if someone can actually read this. And this is also super useful for people who, for example, have like good or perfect eyesight, but maybe have their phone set to a very low brightness, where maybe colors start muddying up. So also from a design point of view, for like regular users, so to say, these things are also super important just to get right. And they often get in the way in terms of design, especially when designers come up with fancy color combinations. It's always good to push back a little bit and say, hey, we need to make sure that people can actually read what's going on here. So
yeah, I think especially contrast is one where like having proper like color contrast, like it adds to the experience for all users.
Yeah.
And I think generally, like if you take accessibility into account, if you think with that accessibility mindset, you will improve the experience for all users, which is something that I love about it.
Yeah, fully agree. So the nice thing is they highlighted all the things that they changed, so you don't have to go through everything. But like they changed all the icons to SF symbols, which is a good approach for making sure that they get the proper names and the dynamic sizing stuff. They focused a lot on the color contrast and with the star icon, making sure it's visible. He made sure that all the buttons have a minimum text size, a minimum tab size, which I think is super nice, because that's one of those things that even just going through a normal app, you oftentimes click on a button and it's just a little bit too small. So just by making sure they all have a minimum height of 44, you can cover most of that there as well. And we see some of the traits here as well, where it says like, hey, this is a button, but it's not an image. So otherwise, VoiceOver would read this word I to infer that it's an image, when in this case, this image is actually used as a button. So I think a lot of those things you can already find out just by turning on VoiceOver and going through your app, right? Like it's not rocket science there in terms of how to deal with it.
I was going to say, I think it's a little bit of rocket science in the sense that there's a lot of settings that you can change. And so, like reading out or like inferred like images, these are settings that you can turn on and off, or, change, where you can say, make a sound if it is an image that I've recognized like content in. So it is a little tricky, and but it's, I think this is something that with user feedback especially, you learn from, and yeah,
makes sense. Also, a simple thing, Accessible ignores invert colors. People can actually choose to invert all the colors on their screen, because maybe, where is that one, smart invert, and here in some cases you want to avoid certain colors from being inverted. So there's a lot of these modifiers that you can try out and see if they're useful for your app. So the tab more that we were talking about before got changed to show more, which covers it a lot better, and also handles alternative inputs that are not just fingers tapping on screens. And also, a simple thing is that this screen actually didn't have a close button. Obviously people can drag it down, but I purposely hid it. And actually, if you don't have that close button, then some people with certain input devices cannot actually close it, or cannot close it easily.
I think this is one of these other examples where like designing for accessibility just makes a better experience for everyone, right? Like having this alternative way of closing the view, especially with like, these kind of modal like cards are relatively new. I think they were introduced with iOS 13. And so, new users might not be familiar with them and be like, hey, there's no close button. What do I do now?
Yeah, I always think of the modal views as the advice that for every gesture you should have an alternate, like a simple button, because I've even found sometimes with me, if I'm holding my phone weird, I can't actually swipe down enough to close the modal. So it's great to always include some sort of a close button.
And something interesting that they actually did is that for the short name, so the AAPL, for example, here, they spell out the letters, the characters, because otherwise you would just get this weird word, Apple or Goog or NNTV or something. So I don't think you would use that in a lot of different scenarios, but it's definitely useful in a stock app where you're having like more custom words to say. And you can still go through everything and then close it and go back there. Let's see. And the stock graph. So he added the Audiograph support. Can either of you tell a little bit more about what that does?
Yeah, I can do that. It's a shame that your sound doesn't work through the stream.
It works through the stream, but not for you, because it gets piped. So yeah.
Gotcha. But yeah, so the Audiographs is a relatively new, at least API. I think it was added to SwiftUI last year. And what it can do is it's an alternate way to like describe a graph. And so the reason for that is, as a user with accessibility needs, navigating these kind of 2D interfaces, as we call them, can be really tough, because if you have your vision, you can like visually like scan, and your brain will like build up this information. But if you can't like see what's on the screen, it's very hard to understand what's actually going on. And so with the Audiograph, it can generate this sound wave that actually like indicates, are we going up, are we going down? And that can help like get an initial get an initial understanding of like what kind of data are we dealing with here. And so like, you know, the apps that ship with this on the OS are something like Health, right? Where you can navigate through your graphs there. We'll definitely check it out. It's really cool.
Yeah, so I'm trying to actually play the sound, but there's a lot of stuff that gets said before, so I'm gonna try to see if I can just hide everything else except for the chart, because basically the magic happens in this accessibility chart descriptor thing, right?
You should be able to, with the Rotor, like just navigate to the Audiograph, and that should pop up like a separate view as well.
Okay, hang on. Let me turn voiceover off.
Son, okay, voiceover.
How do I turn on the rotor?
The Rotor is turned on by default. You can like, basically as if you're, you know, imagine that you go back 20 years in time, you had these phones where you like go like this, and so this is what you do with 2 fingers. You turn on the screen while your voiceover is on, and that's how you
Turn on voiceover.
the Rotor.
Okay, voiceover is now on.
Okay, let's see.
Set it. Listen, button. Voiceover on.
Nice. Go away.
Voiceover off.
No. Sorry about that.
What you can do on that
Turn on
screen as well.
voiceover.
Okay, I turned voiceover on.
Yes, how can I?
So you can go back to the app by doing a double Z, like a 2-finger Z gesture, as I call the Zorro gesture, to go back, and that will dismiss the Siri UI.
That should be the official name for that gesture. I like it.
A Z gesture? As in?
Yes, 2 fingers.
It's just making beeping noises
Okay,
from
it's a little
Oh, are you
tricky.
trying to do the rotor?
I'm just trying to get back to
Oh,
to get this to get this to dismiss.
You can also swipe up from the bottom as if you were.
Ah, yeah, that's working now.
There we
Okay.
go. And so now you should be able to like turn them off. There we go.
Yes.
And this is a good one because you can show like all the options of the Rotor, right? So we have headings, we have navigating by screen recognition.
Let me just turn this off so people don't get. Okay.
We can navigate by characters, right? So like even though we had this like spell out, like certain users might say, hey, I didn't really get that. I want to navigate by character. So you have all of these options.
All right. So if I would want to get to the graph now, just this is a one accessibility 101. How would I be able to navigate to the graph now?
Assuming it's available on the cell element, you would navigate to the cell element, and then go through the Rotor until you get to graph.
Doesn't seem like it's there. We'll get back to this at a later point. Otherwise, we're gonna be spending too much time on here. But definitely something for me as well to dig a little bit more into, because I've seen that element before, but I never really fully understood why people would use it. But this makes a lot of sense there.
Maybe one last note, right? So this person like used SF symbols, which is really great because as mentioned, they like respect like making them bold, turning up the size, etc. And they even come with an inferred like accessibility label. But, and I think this was also done here, you probably want to check and override if necessary, because it will make an assumption, right? So like for a gear, it might say settings, but if you use a gear as an actual gear and it will say settings, that might be confusing. So while they are a great default, you definitely want to double check that as well.
Yeah, so here use the gear shape fill and just gives an accessibility label just to make sure that it's
exactly. Yeah, that's great.
Pronounce the settings. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been nice to show this, but maybe we can show it in another project. And also, like, there's some funky animations going on in the app that are horrible, and he actually made sure they're less horrible, and also that they're disabled if users have animations disabled. So Definitely some nice points over there as well. Then we go to Ryan, which is this one. Also very clear changelog, which I really like. Even some videos to show the different things. So what we were talking about before with the dynamic type, everything working well on different sizes. Also some color settings here as well. So it seems like the color blindness is really covered well in all our things. And a voiceover video as well, which I think is quite similar to what we maybe, let's see if there's the sound there as well. Yeah, so for example, for the chart, they actually explained chart with values going down. Like you said before at the start, Robin, like just explain what's the basic information that you see here, and then if you want to go more, you can dive deeper into it for the detail view, for example. Let's open up projects. And it's really nice to see that for each project, people came up with extra things or things that someone else didn't cover. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff to be learned here for if you want to get into accessibility stuff. So let's have a look. And what's interesting is that Ryan made this HV stack, which is a custom view that he made, which basically, depending on certain settings, it uses a V stack or uses an H stack, and in this case, it's actually used based on if the dynamic type setting is greater than accessibility 1, and the horizontal size class is compact. So there's some things that you can do there to determine, hey, should I now show this new UI that I have, or this new layout? And obviously, you will run into this a lot in your apps. If you have lists, for example, or if you have things that should change. So definitely good approach there as well to have a look at, so that you don't end up writing the same code for all of your views.
Yeah, I have to admit that's one of my files that I include in every project that I use SwiftUI. I have an adapting stack that I've seen on multiple sites out there. You can find it that does that switch between the vertical and horizontal. It would be great if one day this were integrated into Apple as an option for H stack, V stack, and this adapting stack, but we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, so to me it seems like Apple especially is really constantly adding new accessibility features, even sometimes things that I think, whoa, are those things necessary? But then they explain the use case for it, and it's like, oh, I didn't even imagine that. So are there any big holes or things that are missing in terms of accessibility right now that you would hope gets added to Apple's platforms, but the other ones as well?
In terms of like new technologies, I'm not quite aware, and obviously it's Apple, so you never know until it's there.
No, but more like things that you think that are like just difficult things maybe to solve from an accessibility point of view that you wish would at some point be there.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I mean, I've written about this, I've talked about this before. I think in terms of the API, I think SwiftUI is a great improvement over UIKit, where they've been able to leave all the baggage of UIKit and all the corners that they've gotten into with the API design, etc., and make some improvements. So one of them would be custom content, where you don't have to have a protocol to conform to, etc. In UIKit, you have a trait for something that is adjustable, but then you have to implement some functions yourself to handle incrementing and decrementing, and then in SwiftUI, that's been replaced with an adjustable accessibility action that just takes a closure where you handle increment and decrement. So there's been a lot of these kind of improvements in SwiftUI where it's just like, hey, we start with a clean slate. What can we do better? With a bit of a caveat that, SwiftUI is obviously a very different way of writing UI code. So certain things have to be different. But I really love these kind of improvements to the API.
Yeah, good points. Robin, what about you? Are there any things that you are looking forward to being added in the future, or that you wish were were made even easier?
There's still a lot of little things is what's coming to mind aside from this adaptive stack. I'm thinking of a few bugs that they still need to work out with some of the modifiers and stuff, but nothing really big is coming to mind.
All right.
I think what
That's
also
that's
really
good. Yeah.
I think what also really helps is that they've had to play a little bit of catch up to actually support everything that is available in UIKit. So something that was released last year is the large content viewer, which was available in UIKit since iOS 13, but then they weren't able to like catch up and actually like support that on SwiftUI until last year. And so I think they're most of the way there with supporting what is available on UIKit, and from there on, they can really say like, okay, we're adding something new, or like properly optimizing this for SwiftUI, but that will also, with the catch up, making sure that everything works properly in SwiftUI, and that you don't have to like go back to UIKit to implement certain things.
Yeah, good points. They've definitely been working hard on just SwiftUI in general the last 3 years. So it's good to see that accessibility is a super high priority there in getting everything ready there. Because obviously there are still some holes in SwiftUI, but it seems like they're getting plugged really fast. And curious to see what will happen next week as well. I'm going through Ryan's code, and it seems like there's just a lot of stuff that we already covered. So I don't want to spend too much time on the things there, but. It's interesting to see that there's some different approaches for reaching the same end result. So I would definitely recommend people just go through his example as well, because he has some really good documentation on what he did, and yeah, like super nice project again by Ryan, who competed in three different events this week. So he was very busy. Then we'll go
One
to
thing. One thing, maybe while you set up the next project, that I want to point out, what I really like is, this person added some videos of what they did, which makes it really like easy to like get an understanding of the changes. And something that I've recently started doing, and I must give credit to an agency in London or in the UK at least, that helps with accessibility, called Momensa. And what they were saying is like, well, consider doing all your demos using an assistive technology, right? So like, hey, we're adding NOMENSA.
NOM?
ENSA. There we go. Doing all your demos with an assistive technology, right? So all of the new features that we've been shipping in the app that I've been working on, I've demoed them with VoiceOver, I've demoed them with voice control, I've demoed them with full keyboard access. And not only is that a great way to show that it works with assistive technologies, but it also shares this kind of idea of like, hey, there's people that might want to use the software this way, and rely on it. And with that, maybe even going back to what Robin mentioned with the blindfold on, you don't need a blindfold for that with VoiceOver. You can actually do a 3-finger triple tap to turn on something that's called screen curtain, which will just render your screen like completely black. Which, if you think about it, if you are a VoiceOver user, if you are blind, like why would you be spending all your battery on a screen that you can't see? So those are really cool things.
So it's a very simple. I didn't even have to turn that on. It's just an option there. I guess it's on when you have VoiceOver turned on, or?
Yeah, it's just a VoiceOver gesture, interaction. Yeah.
All right. So then we have our next project by Michelle Lau, who, one of the things that I liked about her approach as well is that she's aware like, hey, these numbers actually represent money. They're dollar and cents. So let me just open her project here. So let me run it. So actually somewhere probably she mentioned, hey, these numbers are dollars and is currency. And I didn't even know you could do that. Let me have a look where that's being used. Is it like currency or something? What's the thing you would have to look for to find that?
I suppose one of the things you want to do is format them as currency so that they also use the proper currency formatting depending on the language. I'm not sure what they've done specifically for assistive technologies here.
It looks like she changed the accessibility label and added a bunch of her own strings in there back in the cell.
Let's have a look.
I saw correctly. Oh no, accessibility value, sorry.
Yeah. So in this case, assuming it's dollars and cents, this would obviously work, but there might be ways to always have it just pronounce that for a number or for a value. But yeah, this is a really clear example of thinking, okay, how are people actually listening to this and what are they actually expecting to hear? Let's see.
Yeah, definitely one thing to note here though, right? So maybe here we're also always dealing with dollars, but you do want to be a little wary of like assuming like cents, for example, because that might not be the same with all currencies. But definitely something to consider looking into.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only the dollars and cents, it's good to always keep in mind for these labels and these values that you could use the app in a different language, so it should be localized in language as well as currency.
Yeah, nice thing as well is that I think was it 2 years ago that Apple introduced voice control?
I was 13, yeah.
Okay, let me try to turn off voiceover.
Okay.
And maybe either of you can explain what voice control does, because for me this is a really useful thing to understand in a glance immediately what people see or hear when the app is not accessible.
You want to go for it, Robin?
Oh no, I was about to say you go for it.
All right, cool. Yeah, so voice control is where voiceover is what we call a screen reader. Voice control is this like different way of input where we can control what's on the screen by voice, right? So kind of the opposite of a screen reader in that sense. And as you can see on the screen right now as well, we can like show like the names of items. And so this is actually a really good one where we have mostly very short like inputs. And these are things that a user can say tap Uber, for example.
Tap Spotify.
There we go. And so what it allows you to do is to navigate by voice. And what I love about it as well is it's one of those things that build on top of things that are already done, for example, with VoiceOver. So here, like we've mentioned before, this person has added a close button to a modal, but there's also something that should be for free for these kind of modals that is called the accessibility escape. And this allows you to go back in the stack, right? So for a navigation stack, you can go back. This was the double two-finger like Z gesture, the Zorro gesture as we called it. But then this also allows you in voice control to say go back.
Go back.
And so then that is
Microsoft. Microsoft. Oh. Tap Microsoft. And what's interesting here at the bottom, you see the tap to share, but now you have to actually say tap to share. I don't think it's going to tap to share. Let's see. Tap favorite. Maybe this is something I messed up there. But yeah, like super powerful because people don't even have to touch their device at all, and they can just, without doing a lot of stuff, you can already just make it work.
Well, one of the probably the most magical things, if you ask me about voice control, is with voiceover you can get stuck sometimes, right? If you have a bug or if you don't have like a perfect implementation of it, you might not be able to go back somewhere. But then with voice control, there's this way to exactly, there we go, to show a grid. And so you can just navigate by grid and say 10 and then 5, and then
Tab,
you can just
tab
zoom in
14.
as far as...
Tab 14.
Right, but you can also say here, right, if you basically want to try to tap the, let's say the minus 8.28, the AAPL, you can say 12, and then it will like zoom in.
12. 8. 8. Obviously, in this case, it just opens it, but yeah, you can.
Yeah. Right, like if you want to do that earlier, you can say like tap 10 as was done. But this is like this really cool like catch-all way. And so now we have that as a like permanent overlay, but it's also good to know that anytime you can also say like show grid or show names to like on demand show these options for voice control.
Yeah. And what I liked is
And
that.
then,
oh, yeah, go on.
Yeah, and then one last thing is like, like I said with the accessibility escape, like these are things that you build with VoiceOver, and they like enhance the experience of voice control as well. And then if you enhance the experience for voice control, for example, with user input labels, for example, like the tap to share, making that share, or the settings icon, making that settings, or cog, or gear, and then with that, you've improved it for voice control as well as for full keyboard access with users navigating with the keyboard. And so it's a really cool way of like basically like stacking these kind of implementations and support to support multiple assistive technologies.
Yeah, and one of the benefits as well from having a very accessible app is that it's also really good for testing, right? I don't do a lot of testing, sorry, but it uses some of the same labels there as well for UI testing, correct?
Oh yeah, we do a lot of UI tests at my workplace right now, and for everything we have to have at a minimum an accessibility identifier to be able to access it, but it's much better to have the label and kind of doubles up a little bit on accessibility.
I think an important caveat there, right? So yes, you need an accessibility label. An accessibility identifier. Now I made the same mistake. And so it's a little confusing because an accessibility identifier really doesn't have anything to do with accessibility other than it's an identifier at which to navigate to a certain item, which you want for a UI test. But you don't want to go and rely on labels because those, you want to localize them, you want to maybe change them at some point, and so those would break your UI test. But you do want to add those identifiers, and adding those identifiers, you're going to want to check, hey, I'm adding an identifier to this element. Do I need to update the label? Do I need to add input labels? Do I need to add a value, etc.? So it's a really good way to basically in a very straightforward way, allow you to go through your accessibility elements and making sure that they are both accessible for tests with the identifier as well as to users using assistive technologies. Yeah,
very, very well said. Especially that the identifier is not used really when it comes to using an accessibility tool. We get around, we cheat a little bit on our UI tests. We force a certain language for the UI test. So with that, we can actually look for the label. So that could be an idea. Obviously, that doesn't cover every single language. That would take forever to run all of those tests, but that could help a little bit in your tests.
All right, and with that, we'll go to the last entry of the day, which got submitted like an hour before we started. So we haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but they started with a little apology saying that they made some drastic changes to the layout and that they will perhaps be responsible for more rules in any SwiftUI Series 2. But no, we only appreciate that, so don't worry about that at all. Um, uh, let's see if there's something. One
Just
particular
on
gripe.
first glance, I like how you replaced the charts.
Yeah, I didn't really know how to make a chart like this I didn't want to spend like hours on this, so I wonder how much time. Ooh, I mean, I'm definitely gonna see how they did this because I wanted to make something like this, but after 5 minutes, it's like, oh yeah, I'll just do dots. It's fine. um, but yeah, like obviously some nice improvements there in terms of just the whole UI of the app. You can actually add more charts, more stocks. So yeah, kudos for that. Yeah, just an overall better app, I would say, but let's focus on the accessibility part. So let's go through. One particular gripe of mine is how VoiceOver gets selective amnesia of which cell you selected. This happens even in the default stock app, so I implemented a rather hacky accessibility focus state to ensure focus is returned to the cell clicked on after a pop segue. I will just have to trust them on their words, but let me just try to run this as well.
Yeah, one thing I like here, right, is I think we can see that optimizing it for accessibility has also made some changes that might make it easier for anyone as well. The lines being one, in the detail view, you have the dotted line, so you have, like this enhanced view where you can also say like, what kind of changes are there. And yeah, I really like the UI. You have some of the buttons at the bottom. Which is an interesting one because that might technically like make it harder for VoiceOver, depending on your implementation, but it makes it easier
Turn VoiceOver on.
To reach.
Okay.
So that's an
VoiceOver is
interesting
now
one
on.
as well.
So I get stuck in this screen again, but I should be able to just dismiss this, right?
You can either swipe up again, or you can use the Z gesture.
Yeah, but like just swiping. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Let's see. Yeah, I mean it's just very similar to what we saw before with the VoiceOver support. So it seems to be working well. Is there anything in particular we would want to highlight from this example? I love all the documentation, by the way. Like very clear explanations of what's going on, why it's being used. The large content viewer, is that the one you were talking about before, Buzz? That was just added to SwiftUI?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so obviously a bit too much for us to dig into now since we only are looking at this now for the first time, but let me see if there's anything.
Actually, so using the toolbar there is a really good one, because that, again, is like this native API that makes it a container, which makes it easier to navigate to with VoiceOver. So this is where I was like, it might, like make the VoiceOver experience worse, but using the toolbar is a great way to rely on the system to enable like proper navigation to it. So that's great.
Yeah, so you mean this section here at the bottom, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they added a bunch of extra controls, which is obviously nice. The accessibility custom rotor that we also talked about before. Yeah, moving buttons to the bottom toolbar for easier reach. And the Audiograph is there as well. So let me try that rotor one more time to see how that works here. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to actually go through this. So how would I now be able to...
It might be in the actions rotor. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I think it's when you have actions selected on the rotor, you can go up or down with a swipe. And there should be an action chart.
let's see. So I would move now to actions, and then what do I do?
If you swipe up or down, I believe that should filter through the actions available.
With 1 or 2 fingers?
Just one, I believe.
Okay. So if I do if I swipe now, we'll just go through the list. So yeah, we'll leave this as a if we figure this out, or if I figure this out, I'll let everyone know afterwards. But yeah, it would be cool to hear the audiograph as well at some point. Yeah, it might actually be a good, like, are you aware of any good tutorials on this, or like sort of instruction videos of how these accessibility features work for people who don't necessarily need them in their daily lives?
I've wrote about the topic a bunch. There's a bunch of videos by Apple Support that give some idea of how to use rotors, etc. So I think those are a good way to start.
Cool. I'll ask you them after the stream, and then I'll add them to the website and to the GitHub repo, so people can use those for further research as well. But yeah, like another really good entry. I think what the theme is with the entries for today's event is that they're all really good, and there's not really one that is completely, well, except from changing some design. I think they're all just really good and just show the different variety. So even though we didn't really have winners throughout the week, sometimes we still chose a winner. But I think for today's event, there's not really any reason to do that, because there's a lot of really good ones. Except I actually got a message from let me get the right person before that we actually do have a prize to give for this one. So let me see where they are.
Whilst you look for that, yeah, I definitely want to point out, thank you everyone for taking on this challenge and learning about accessibility. And yeah, I would also say, like, yes, you can definitely start and like learn a bit about accessibility, start improving your app, learn from it. And then, hopefully at some point you can, get some users to try it out, and I'm sure you'll get a bunch of feedback. But this is a great way to start, and I would definitely encourage anyone to go and do that. And with that, I would definitely say, like, everyone that joined this has won.
Yeah, because I think once you actually start doing this and seeing how easy it is, it will be very easy just to keep using this in all your projects from now on. So Rob Whittaker, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, Whittaker. He wrote a really nice book on accessibility and on how to develop inclusive mobile apps, and he very kindly offered to give away a copy of his book to a winner.
I've got it too.
You've got it?
Yeah, and Boss just showed his copy. You have it right next to your desk.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that if our judges have the book by their side, that means it's definitely a good one to have. So I think that means, well, yeah, that means that we have to, although everyone is a winner in our book, we still have to decide one person who we think did something really interesting, who showed some attention to detail.
Well, I would say one thing I really like is the documentation that people wrote. And so I think that will, together with the application code, right, I think that is something we can look at as like, what is the best place to start if you say, like, I want to get into accessibility and, like, maybe look at this project, like, what would be a great one to learn from?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I think I would then nominate this one. I think it's by Ryan Cole, just because he has like this whole long list of all the things they implemented, and then just very clear like steps of the different things that are most important, and in the code also really nice documentation there as well. I like the videos in this one from Ryan as well, but I feel like this one goes a bit more in depth. And again, like, there's not going to be one person that we think is like 100 times better than everyone else. So it's not, if you don't win, it's also not not like you're not doing it correctly. But yeah, what do you think about that one for going for?
Yeah, I think my favorite was the one that you showed first, Ryan Cole, I think was his last name.
Yeah.
Because of the documentation, and I think he had my heart at his reference to the web content accessibility guidelines in his documentation. That's just bonus points on bonus points to really understand some those guidelines. So I think he would. It's hard to pick a winner because, like you guys said, everyone did a really good job on this one, but I think I would have to favorite his. What do you think, boss?
Yeah, sounds good. I definitely also really like the people that have added some videos, because if you're aware of accessibility and all of that, like just reading might make things clear, but having certain videos that show, hey, what kind of impact does this make? Actually, make a big change as well.
Makes it more tangible, yeah.
Makes it more tangible, makes it more understandable. Which is also definitely something I like.
All right, so I think we only have one book to give away. So and since Ryan already won once in this week, I think we'll go with the other Ryan. Can we agree on that idea behind it?
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so a little applause for Ryan and also for all the other entries, because like we said before, everyone did a really good job, and I think it's for the future will be a really good reference for people just to play around with accessibility ability stuff. So yeah, with that, I want to thank both Robin and Bus a lot for taking the time on this Friday morning to go through this project with me. Really appreciate your insights. As you can maybe see, sometimes there's a lot that I can also still learn. So I'm just really glad to have the both of you here to give some feedback and guidance on what's actually going on here. Maybe Robin, I know that you're going to be speaking on a bunch of conferences later this year. What else are you working on, or is there anything you want to share?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having us here. This has been a blast. Let's see, both Boss and I will be at SwiftConf in Germany later this year. So I think tickets are still available if anyone is interested. But let's see, I don't have many projects to show off, except I very recently started a weekly newsletter for accessibility on iOS and Android. Brand new, issue 2 went out today.
Where can people find that?
On my Twitter, there is a link to my company, my personal projects. We'll find the link there.
Yeah, so
yes,
people can find your Twitter on the Twitter feed as well.
If you go back, sorry, the Twitter. Sorry. My bad. In the description of my Twitter account, there is @accessibleapps.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. That's my day job.
Yeah.
And right there's a newsletter, Accessible Mobile Apps Weekly. Testing it out to see if there's interest, see if people like it or not. But of course, subscribe if you'd like, or send me ideas for things to include, iOS and Android, and anything related to accessibility.
Nice. That sounds like a really good resource for people who want to just make accessibility more part of their brain process every week, but just getting these little reminders. So yeah, if you're watching, definitely subscribe to that. And Bus, what about you?
Also a big thank you for inviting me. Happy to help out here. I don't have that much to plug. I'll also be speaking a bunch of events, as I've been doing for the last few years. So you might see me pop up here and there. And one thing I'm really excited about, so was it 2 weeks ago? It was Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I think it was last week. And one thing that I also mentioned there, and that's something I'm really proud of, is the company I'm working for, WeTransfer. They have this like company-wide accessibility focus where we're really aiming to make this next step in making all of our products accessible. And being able to contribute to that and being a part of that is something I'm really excited about. So yeah.
Nice. Sounds good. All right. With that, we've also come to the end of the first SwiftUI series. So it was quite intense to do 5 of these streams in a week. So I'm not sure if the same format will be going on the next time. But little sneak peek, we're going to be doing a one-day event like this during WWDC as well, from Cupertino. So I'm still looking into the location, but on the Friday of WWDC week, we're actually going to do the Dub series, where you will have to make a super small app, less than 150 lines of code, showing off any of the new APIs that are announced next week or in 2 weeks from now. So yeah, more information about that will go out soon. But other than that, I really appreciated all the entries this week. Everyone who took the time to share their stuff, ask questions, put in time, and actually making cool stuff that we can talk about on these live streams. So yeah, thanks everyone for that. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll send a little survey or something out afterwards as well to get some feedback on what we can improve, or what I can improve. I'm sure there's not like a team here. But yeah, so Robin, Boss, thanks again, and hopefully see you soon.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thank you.
All right, bye bye. So I ended the stream, or no.